Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ann Oti from the Senior Core team, and I'll get us kicked off with some housekeeping notes. All lines are on mute and will remain on mute throughout the duration of the call, which means that if you have questions at any time, please make sure to put them in the Q&A pod. If you're having technical problems, please let us know in the chat box, making sure to send it to all panelists and attendees. For audio, we do recommend having the system call you, and this call is being recorded, which means that if you do not wish to be recorded, you can disconnect at any time. The recording and the slides will be made available in the All Grantee call course on Litmus. We've got a full plate for today, so without further ado, I will hand it over to Miss Debbie Cox-Roush, the Director of Senior Core.
Thank you, Ann. Can I get a sound check?
You sound great.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, and welcome everyone for joining our September All Grantee call today. It's unusual, but I'm actually calling you from our headquarters today. I've been in the office all day, and it's kind of nice to be back here. But before I get started, I do want to certainly send out our thoughts and prayers to those of you in California and Oregon that are part of the fire that we've been fighting. I got some devastating news today that some of our programs, their offices are very close. Some volunteers have lost their homes. And so just know that we're with you. If there's anything we can do at this point in time, or especially as we move forward, please just let us know. I also want to tell all of you that are in the path of Hurricane Sally, which is now a hurricane. If you need to be preparing for Sally's upcoming landfall, which I believe they're still saying is going to be sometime tomorrow, and you have preparations to make, you don't need to be on this call. We will update you. I saw a couple questions from Mobile, and just know that everyone in the Gulf Coast is in our thoughts and prayers, and but don't feel like you have to be on this call. Preparation is the key. Your safety is the most important. I talk about fires and I talk about hurricanes, and to be honest with you, it's almost unfathomable that it's already September and that we're approaching the another end of the fiscal and calendar year. Tomorrow will be September 15th. I don't know, I almost feel like we started these calls, it was only March 13th just a few months ago, although I know there's days we all feel like it's been a long time. So I still hope and always hope and think of you all every day. We just celebrated Grandparents' Day yesterday, and I just hope that you and all your volunteers remain healthy and safe, and that as our states are reopening, that you're working on your plans to return our volunteers to service and whatever that capacity might look like. And I know it looks very different. On this month's call, we're going to continue the pattern of what you all asked for, and that's inviting others to speak and share information with you. Last month, you heard from ACL Administrator Lance Robertson, and then from a few of your colleagues who are utilizing virtual alternatives to continue some of their program service activities. And, I do have agency updates that I want to give and that I'll share with you towards the end of this call. But before I do that, I wanted you first to hear from someone who helps me to ensure that you have the resources that you need for your projects. Then you will hear from two of your peers who will share valuable information from their programs with you. But now I do want to introduce you to someone who some of you may know, but those newer to our programs may not know her, especially if you were not around to hear her during our last in-person Senior Core convening. She has extensive history with and commitment to national service. She began her tenure just after college as an AmeriCorps City Year member, and then as an AmeriCorps NCCC team leader. She's been a big part of our CNCS leadership team in several capacities. She was Director of Policy and Operations for AmeriCorps NCCC, and then served as Acting Director of AmeriCorps Vista. She now serves as our Acting Chief of Program Operation, who advises our CEO on operations, policy, and management issues. In this capacity, she helps me ensure that we set policies and operations so that you have the resources and optimal flexibility to efficiently and effectively manage your projects. And while she may have a longer history with AmeriCorps, I can tell you that she's a super fan of Senior Core. I really do not know what I would do without her constant support and guidance, especially during this last 6 and 7 months. Her friendship to me and to all of you has just meant so much. And so it's my pleasure to virtually introduce to you our Acting Chief of Program Officers, Erin Dolan. Erin?
Thank you so much, Debbie. Everybody hear me okay?
You
I can
sound
hear you
great.
great.
Okay. Well, I really, really appreciate the invitation to join you all today. As Debbie said, I am a super fan of Senior Corps. I absolutely love the work that the programs do all over the country, and talk about it to everyone that will listen, about the powerful work that our Senior Corps grantees do. First, I really want to share with you all what I'm sure you already know, and that's that you have a tried and true staff in the Senior Corps team who are really fully committed to your success. Under Debbie's leadership, she is so focused on making sure that the programs have what they need to be successful, and that the good work that you do day in and day out are highlighted regularly. You have a really fierce advocate in Debbie who always has the concerns of the Senior Corps programs in her focus. And I'm sure you know that, but she constantly makes us aware of the needs and triumphs and successes of the Senior Corps programs. Today, I'm joining you really to just to give you all a huge thank you. I am so thankful for the work that your programs always do, but now more than ever. When COVID-19 upended our lives early this spring, we all wondered what was going to happen to our volunteers and the many people that relied on them for service. And what we have seen is your unwavering commitment to find a new way to serve, to find a way to be flexible, to focus on problem solving so service could continue. I'm so proud of how the Senior Corps programs have adapted and changed, and really how your insights and lessons learned have helped us to continue to build on providing that same information to other programs that are trying to adapt under this new environment. Really, this kind of focus on improvement and adaptability has helped make our Senior Corps programs even stronger. I want you to know how appreciative I am for your continued perseverance and flexibility in this challenging environment. I'm inspired every day by the passion and the commitment, and I'm really thankful to see all of the wonderful partnerships across the country that rely on our Senior Corps programs. And really, as leaders of the Senior Corps programs, you have put your passion into practice every day. As our country faces an unprecedented set of challenges, you know that your work is more important than ever. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is as the pandemic continues, it's really putting a strain on the nonprofit and public sector. And our Senior Corps programs are really reaching in to help fill that gap and meet those surging community needs. And as our nation's students go back to school, whether it's virtual, hybrid, in person, depending on where you live in the country, I am appreciative of the way that Senior Corps programs are figuring out ways to adapt as well, to continue to provide the tutoring, mentoring, and other supports to keep kids focused. And at a time of high isolation, our senior companions are continuing to provide wellness checks via phone, and trying to ensure that homebound populations aren't facing the dual pandemics of loneliness as well as the threat of the virus itself. And as our country is working through these tough challenges, Senior Corps is bringing people together to address these problems across the country. We know this next year is going to be a challenging one, but seeing the adaptability of your programs during the past 6 months, I'm confident that we are going to continue to rise to the challenge to meet the moment. And as we continue to evolve and implement programming during this time of COVID, I know that you'll keep at the forefront the safety of your volunteers, staff, and the people that you serve. Continue to focus on the flexible solutions you've already implemented, finding new ways of connecting with people to help our volunteers acquire the skills they need to be successful in a virtual environment or in an environment that looks a lot different than how they may have served before. I ask that you continue to raise your concerns and your triumphs to the staff in the regions and at headquarters. We know that for many of our volunteers, serving during this time can be especially rewarding. Knowing that you're making a difference at a time of heightened need can be a great source of pride and satisfaction. But also, service during a pandemic can be really stressful and challenging. There is more uncertainty, and their service may be very different than it was before. Many of our volunteers will likely have their service altered during the year as schools change from offering instruction virtually to in person or vice versa. We also know our volunteers may have concerns about health and safety or be dealing with extra challenges at home. It's important for all of us to be aware of these pressures, to check in often, and to offer help when we need it. And lastly, we also need we also know that for many of our volunteers, they may be unable to serve in the way they are used to, or perhaps not at all just yet. I ask you to continue to train and support these members as we adapt to a new reality. And I really just want to end how I started, to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without you, without your commitment, your dedication, and your focus. So again, my deep appreciation for the work that you all have been doing and will be doing in the future. Debbie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for sharing your time with us today. But before you leave, and you're certainly welcome to stay on the whole call, I do want to say in front of this entire group today how much I sincerely appreciate all the time, effort, and thoughtfulness that you put into ensuring that our senior corps future remains bright. There's many days I become very frustrated, and you've just kept me going, and you've been just such a good friend to senior corps, and we really appreciate it. I just appreciate your investment in our programs. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today.
Thanks, Debbie. It was a pleasure being here.
Great, thank you, Erin. You know, y'all, during one of my earlier discussions with you, I mentioned that recent national events has prompted CNCS to re-examine our equity and inclusion practices, including the impact that those practices have on our workplace, our grant making, on our ability to recruit and train diverse volunteers. Senior Corps has taken steps to include language in our NOFAs about diversity and inclusion as grantee organizations. But then, you know, I also started to think about our volunteer recruitment efforts, and we should be sure that we're opening up opportunities for every older adult, for every American. You know, I was pondering training and other resources that we might offer to help you rethink your work in this arena when I remembered that a couple of years ago during a site visit to Texas, actually I think it was a disaster seminar, I met Crystal Petrie. During a discussion with Crystal, she mentioned that she had conducted a 3-year study for her master's thesis on volunteer inclusiveness. So in June, we reconnected, and I asked her if she'd be interested in making a presentation on one of our future calls. So she's here with us today to lead a discussion about steps to take to recruit an equally inclusive volunteer pool. And I think that we all know, and I'm working on it every day, recruitment is going to be huge for us as we come out of this pandemic. So I hope today that Crystal just gives you some food for thought. So Crystal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to teach and just give some information on how to have an equally inclusive volunteer pool. So I'll go ahead and get started. So as you can see, the name of the slide is Equally Inclusive Volunteer Pool. And as I'm going, I just want to let you guys know, and I'll talk about it a lot throughout my presentation, that the information that I'm going to give you is not an overnight deal. It's something that's going to take days, weeks, months, and years to accomplish and to continue. So it's not something that can be accomplished overnight or in 1 month, but it's something that you need to start and continue on. So I'll go to the next slide, please. So what I wanted to do is, when I became director of Golden Triangle RSVP, it was in 2014, as you can see right there. And one of the things, as you're listening and hopefully taking notes, look at the pictures that I post of my wonderful, awesome volunteers. And I just want you to see how they progress in inclusiveness as we go on throughout this slide. And if you have questions, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and I can answer those as I'm going. So here, real quickly, I'll go through. So in 2014, Golden Triangle RSVP had 6 Hispanic volunteers, 508 non-Hispanic or non-Latino volunteers, no American Indian, no Alaskan Native. We had 99 African American volunteers, 2 Native Hawaiian volunteers, and 404 Caucasian volunteers. And that is what my volunteer pool looked like whenever I first came on in 2014. Okay, and the next slide. Now, the things that I want you to learn and take away from this presentation are two main things. Number one, I want you to really look at your volunteer pool and really look at your advisory council and look at those demographics. How many African Americans do you have volunteering? How many Asian Americans do you have volunteering? How many Caucasians do you have volunteering? And look at your advisory council as well. Who do you have on your advisory council? What do you see? Who do you see? And this is something that we have to do on purpose. Look at who is volunteering and look at who is sitting on our advisory council. The second thing that I want you to take away from this presentation is how to purposely recruit for equally inclusive volunteer pool. And this is something that we all have to do on purpose. It has to be at the forefront of our mind, the forefront of our thoughts, and the forefront of our recruiting efforts. Whenever we start recruiting again, we have to make sure that our volunteers and our advisory council are reflective of the community that we serve. Okay, next slide, please. And this is just an amazing quote that I wanted to bring everyone's attention to, and I'll read that. The assumption can be made that people are unaware of the social norm to target a certain group of people to volunteer. But the assumption can also be made that some people fight to preserve past and current social norms. And basically what he is saying is, myself, I'm an African-American woman, so it would be very easy for me to continue to recruit African-American volunteers and African-Americans to sit on my advisory council. But that is not reflective of how my community looks. So I need to get out of my social norms and target other people that do not look like me. So if your advisory council, and again, I'll use myself as an example, if your advisory council is all African Americans, then that is not reflective of your community. If your volunteer pool are all African Americans and maybe one Caucasian, that is not reflective of your community that you live in and the community that you're serving. So you want to make sure that your advisory council and your volunteer pool are reflective of the community that you serve. And sometimes it's easy for us to stand our social norms and target the people that look like us, but we have to, on purpose, start targeting other people that do not look like us. Okay, next slide, please. So again, in around 2014, this was how my advisory council and my volunteer pool looked. Of course, we had well over 500 people volunteering, which is a massive number. And I love all of my volunteers, of course. But when I came on 2014, the majority of all of my volunteers, I would say maybe about 95, 96% of them were Caucasian female. So that was the first thing that I noticed, and it was definitely something that I said that I needed to change, that I wanted to change, because I wanted my volunteers and my advisory council to look like the community that we serve. So I immediately put in place ways to recruit more male volunteers and more people of color volunteers in my volunteer pool and on my advisory council. So when I came on my advisory council, I had about 20 people. All of them were wonderful. All of them absolutely loved Golden Triangle RSVP. I had one African-American male on there, and I had one or two African-American females on my advisory council, and the rest were Caucasian women. And again, all of them were wonderful. All of them loved Golden Triangle RSVP, but that was not reflective of the community that we served. So, okay, next page, please. Now, and this is just the latest information about who's volunteering. And as you can see, I got this information from the Bureau of Labor statistics in 2015, African Americans volunteered 19%, Asian 17%, Hispanic 15%, and Caucasians 26%. So these numbers, you know, they're all kind of around the same, except of course for the Caucasians who are volunteering way more. But one of the things that I discovered was African Americans and people of color are volunteering, but they are not volunteering in, say, groups like CNCS or Golden Triangle RSVP or FGP. They're not volunteering in those groups. They're volunteering in their own communities. So when you're volunteering in your own communities, you don't have the opportunity to be counted as being volunteers. So for example, with RSVP or FGP, we are counting those numbers and we are submitting those numbers to CNCS. So those people that are volunteering, they're able to be counted. But for other people of color who are not volunteering in, say, an organized group, they are not being counted, but they are volunteering. And this was something that I discovered once I got out of my own social norm and started going out into other communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do you recruit an equally inclusive volunteer pool? And again, these are just a few of the things that I do. And if you have questions, I can answer those questions. And I can also, if it's allowed, you know, give you guys my email and we can go more in depth about exactly what I do to make sure that my volunteer pool and my advisory council are reflective of the community that we serve. So number one, go into the neighborhoods of people of color. So go into the neighborhoods of African Americans, go into the neighborhoods of Hispanics and Asians and different people that do not look like you. Go into those neighborhoods and introduce yourself. Let them know who you are, let them know what you're doing, and especially let them know how being a part of your group will be beneficial not only to the group and to the community, but also to them. Number two, go into the schools and find out about the meetings. So one of the things that I did was, and I'm sure it's probably everywhere, but I know specifically in Southeast Texas where I'm located, there are a lot of retired teacher associations and school retired personnel associations and different things like that who are always looking for speakers. So that was something that I did. I went into the schools and found out about these different organizations. And then I was able to set up meetings, introduce myself, build a rapport with the people within the group, and started speaking to these groups every year or twice a year, whenever they would allow me to. And then eventually what started happening is they started calling me and asking me to come in and speak. And this gave me the opportunity to go out to, a lot of times I was the only African American in the room speaking about Golden Triangle RSVP. And that was okay because I knew that I needed those people in that room to make sure that my volunteer pool and my advisory council were reflective of the community that we served. And I also needed their input. I needed their knowledge. I needed their wisdom to make sure that my organization could be the best that it could be. Some other things that I did was for the Hispanic community, I would go into the Hispanic community, and oftentimes I needed a translator to translate to the people in the room. But again, I started going so much and I established a great relationship with them that they started calling me and asking me to come and speak at their meeting. So, you know, one of the things that you can do, get into these neighborhoods, find out who the community leaders are in these neighborhoods and in these communities, introduce yourself, and then start going to those meetings. Number three, get public service announcements. Now, PSAs are free on the radio station, and according to contractual obligations with radio stations, they have to have a certain number of PSAs aired on their radio station. So call the radio station, find out about the PSAs, and then record your PSA. A lot of times, I know for me, I had to write my own PSA, and they give you a time. They'll give you 30 seconds or 20 seconds, but you have to write your own PSA, and then you go in and record it, and they play it on the radio station, and it's absolutely free. And this is just another way to get into the communities that maybe don't look like you, where you can step out of your social norms, but people are still hearing about your wonderful program and the wonderful services that you do. Number 4, another thing that you can do, and again, this is free, is you can get an article written in a Hispanic newspaper or a Hispanic magazine locally to your community. And if you don't know about any Hispanic newspapers or magazines, you can Google that in your area. And if there are any, it will come up. But what I would do, same thing, once I built a really good relationship in the Hispanic community, they started inviting me to write articles for their newspaper and to write articles for their magazine. And I would do that, and they would translate it for me and then print it in their newspapers and then print it in their magazines. So one of the things, I will tell you is go into these communities, and it's something that you have to do repeatedly. Because, it's kind of like we tell our kids, stranger danger. The first time you go, maybe, they're not going to warm up to you. But as you continuously go into these communities that do not look like you, they will start having a relationship with you. They will start building trust with you and acknowledging you. And one of the things that came out of all of this is different people started volunteering on my advisory council. They started volunteering in my volunteer pool, and I started recruiting more men into my volunteer pool. I started recruiting more African Americans, more Hispanics, just because of the few things that I'm telling you. And then one of the last things is the use of social media. I cannot stress the use of social media enough. It's free, and it allows you to show your community how your volunteers look. So if I'm on Facebook and I'm seeing people that look like me, that are volunteering, that are having fun, that are making a difference in the community, then 9 times out of 10, I am going to pick up the phone or send a message on Facebook asking, how can I be a part of that? And I have had that happen a number of times where people will send me messages or they will reply to the post, how can I be a part of this? How can I volunteer in this group and in this organization? And it's because of the use of pictures, because of the use of video that I'm showing men that are volunteering. I'm showing Hispanic communities that are volunteering. I'm showing African American and Asian volunteers, and other people want to be a part of that. So this is just a few things that I have done. Of course, I have several other things that I'm doing, but these are the main things that I do on purpose, and I'm doing them consistently. So since 2014, I have been doing all of these things and more to make sure that my volunteer pool and my advisory council are reflective of the community that we serve. Next slide, please. And again, I want to bring your attention to the volunteers and how they have changed from the first slide. And this is not a checkbox system. And I don't want you guys to think that, that, okay, I have an African American woman, check. I have a Hispanic man, check. You want to go into these communities and get the community to get behind your organization and start supporting your organization and becoming members, lifelong members of your organization. And of course, you guys can see that that was us, and that's me with Houston Astros, and that's Connie. We're not supposed to have our favorite volunteers, like we're not supposed to have our favorite kids, but I absolutely love Connie, and we were at a Houston Astros game taking a picture with the mascot. But as you can see, I have more men On my volunteer pool, I have more women who are reflective of the community that we serve in my volunteer pool as well. So next slide, please. And this is I was trying to find a picture of my advisory council when I first got there in 2014, but I could not find one. But this is my volunteer advisory council now. So as you can see, it is very diverse, it's very inclusive, and it is something that I am so proud of. And it's something that I have really worked hard at continuously to make sure that my advisory council is reflective of the community that we serve, as well as my volunteer pool. They are becoming more and more reflective of the community that we serve. And again, in order to do this, one of the first things that you absolutely have to do is look at your advisory council, look at your volunteer pool. Who do you see? And you have to be honest with what you are seeing. Who are you seeing? Are you seeing all African Americans? Are you seeing all Caucasian, all Hispanic? What are you seeing in your advisory council, and what are you seeing in your volunteer pool? Next slide, please. So within a year, this was my breakdown. So I had recruited 16 male volunteers, and this is from 2014 to 2015, 16 male volunteers, 6 African Americans, and 1 Hispanic. So of course, I continued to recruit Caucasian females, and I didn't put that on there, but I continued to recruit Caucasian females. They were never slighted in the least bit, but I just wanted to bring your attention to what I was able to accomplish in 1 year. And these numbers have continued to increase over the years. So we have continued to recruit more male volunteers. We've continued to recruit more people of color volunteers in my volunteer pool and on my advisory council. Next slide, please. And this is just an amazing quote that I want you guys to take away. Talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So people of color want to volunteer. They're volunteering in their communities, they're volunteering in their churches, they're volunteering in their schools, they're volunteering in their neighborhoods. But a lot of times the opportunity to volunteer within organized groups are not presented to them unless we go into those communities, go into those schools, and give them the opportunity to volunteer in our organized group. Next slide, please. And really, that's kind of all I have right now. I know it was quick and I know it was brief, but I want to thank everyone for listening, and hopefully you took notes. And if you have some questions, we can answer those now. If I'm allowed, I'll give out my email address as well. So if you have other questions, you can email me and we can really go into depth about some other things that I did. But this is the picture that I took with Debbie that she was mentioning in Austin, Texas, when she came out to Texas for the disaster meeting. And this was just a selfie that we took. I love taking selfies. And of course, I put that on our social media page to let everyone know that I have met the Debbie Cox Roush from CNCS. So again, thank you all for listening. And again, thank you, Debbie, for giving me the opportunity to talk about how to make our volunteer pool and our advisory council more inclusive and reflective of the community that we serve.
Great. So thank you so much, Crystal. And how are we doing on time? Or do we want to gather some of the questions in chat? I was going to tell everyone that we're going to look at October and November to do a whole segment on recruiting, and of course in some other options that are coming up. But Anne, how are we doing on time?
We're doing pretty good on time. There are 2 questions I'll ask aloud, and then
Okay.
Crystal, feel free to answer the rest in the Q&A pod, and feel free to share your email in the chat box as well.
Okay.
So one question, we got a couple of questions about how this looks in this time of COVID. Have you done anything different? Are you doing it virtually during this time of COVID? Are you still going into neighborhoods?
right now, because of COVID, I am not able to go into and do any speaking engagements because of the social distancing and things like that. And the entities that would normally call and invite me, or I would, make myself available, are not having any meetings. They're not doing anything virtual, and they're not doing anything face to face. But as soon as we are able to go back into the communities and go back and start having meetings and gatherings and things like that, I will resume the exact same thing that I've been doing. I'm still doing a lot of things on Facebook, just pictures and things like that, to show people that, who my volunteers are and things like that. But right now, I'm not able to go out and do anything face to face, and they have not set up anything virtual to allow me to go out and speak.
Thanks. And then we've got a couple of questions about how you specifically target men in recruitment. Could you share a couple of tips?
Absolutely. So when it comes to men, what I have found and discovered is they are not going to participate in something. And I've also, just a quick tangent, given kind of a training for churches, because sometimes they have this issue as well, where you have a lot of women that are volunteering, but you don't have men that are participating. So I've also kind of spoken churches about the same thing. But what you want to do is, I had a few men that were volunteering, and what I did is highlighted those men in a respectable, honorable way to show other men that we have men volunteering. So whenever we had men that were out at their volunteer spots and things like that, or delivering Meals on Wheels, I would make sure and take pictures of them and put them on Facebook. Or if I had organizations that wanted me to write an article or something, they always want you to provide pictures. I would always provide pictures of men volunteering with those articles. And something that I also did was, I created a speakers bureau, and I have men within that speakers bureau. So whenever I was going out and speaking to different organizations, I always made sure I had a male come with me to speak to that organization, so that other men could see men volunteering.
Great, thank you. Well, everyone, you can continue to put in your questions for Crystal into the Q&A pod. She'll be in there, and I will hand it back to Debbie.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much, Crystal. I continue to hear about recruitment challenges. So your presentation today, I hope it really does provide some food for thought. When we get to a place that we can actively start recruiting again, and I know this is a huge issue and going to be even more so after we come out of the pandemic. And so Senior Corps headquarters will continue to work on recruitment efforts and how to help you. But Crystal, beware, I may reach out again. I knew when I met you in Austin, you were a rock star, and I still believe that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I've told all of you on more than one occasion how proud I am of the way that you pivoted to continue to provide services to your communities during this pandemic. Last month, you heard from a few of your colleagues about their pivot to virtual volunteer activities. Today, one of your colleagues will talk with us about her transportation program. I know we just finished a survey from you all, which I will cover on the next grantee call, if not in an email sooner. FGP just did a survey. I know that even though the majority of our volunteers are willing and hoping to do virtual service, that we have 20 to 25% of our volunteers that will not do any technology, that will not be able to do service through technology or the internet. And so over the next few meetings, whether it's my director's notes or these calls, I want you all to know that we're very, very aware that we need to keep thinking of alternative service for our volunteers that cannot do technology. And we know that transportation service is critical for older adults in normal circumstances. So, when there's an emergency or an unconventional circumstance, transportation, especially to medical appointments, comes even more crucial. RSVP Director Cindy Whitney understood this challenge, and through in-person volunteering, has continued this vital service for older adults even during a pandemic. So I'm going to stop talking now because you need to hear from your colleagues. Cindy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
You sound great.
I'll take that as yes, thank you. So I wanted to start off because I think that probably talking about what we do in person, and especially related to transportation, putting people in a enclosed space, that is going to generate a lot of questions. So I sort of wanted to start off by giving you a bit of an overview of my sponsor organization. I'm with the Catholic Charities here in Maine, and we are a very hands-on social service agency. Just to kind of give you a feel for that, we do behavioral health services, substance abuse treatment, in-home senior support services, of which our RSVP does some, but there are other programs, childcare, food security, to name a few. So pretty much everything we do as an agency is very hands-on. So when Maine started responding to the pandemic and our governor's orders started coming out and the different precautions, our agency followed that all very carefully, and it was determined that most of us as staff were essential workers and were classified as such. We were moved remotely and apart and all of those things, but our volunteers under the governor's guideline were also determined to be essential workers in some cases. This also prompted the agency to combine with their policy and our governor's orders and CDC guidelines and so forth, a very comprehensive internal policy for pandemic and infectious disease, which was signed by all of us as staff and all of our volunteers. And when I say comprehensive, it is 8 pages of 11 or 12 point font. So it's not double spaced. So it's a very extensive document. And this was done in May. So very extensive guidelines were put out. Now, I am an RSVP program, as Debbie mentioned, and we have a heavy component, a work plan on companionship. So when this hit, we were very worried about the isolation factor, as I know, senior companion programs across the country are as well. But we did have a number of our volunteers who had been with their clients for several years. We are a new program, but we had some existing volunteers in the community who had been visiting clients. So with isolated seniors, these volunteers also knew that the clients they were visiting and the people they were going into homes or riding with did not have a lot of interactions. And so both the volunteer and the client had a feel for the level of exposure and risk. That all being said, what we did was develop a very stringent policy for in-person transportation, because we did have people who had cancer care treatments that we were their only way to get there, and other critical needs that we were the only option. We're in a very rural part of Maine. And so we notified our volunteers and our clients who were using transportation, the clients who were using transportation and the volunteers who were providing, that only should be done for critical needs. Be clear, we are not taking people shoe shopping. Both the volunteer and client should not feel that they have any symptoms or have any indication that they are sick whatsoever before a ride is given. They both, besides that, need to feel comfortable with the transportation. So if one or the other, for whatever reason, feels that it poses a risk or exposure to them, then it does not happen. Our agency was able to provide PPE in the form of masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer, and this was procured through the agency, so it was not a cost directly at that point in time to our RSVP program. So mask and glove were able to be provided to both volunteers and clients, and hand sanitizer was provided to all of the volunteers who was available. What we did beyond that was ask that both the client and volunteer distance as much as possible. So obviously the volunteer sits in the front in the driver's seat, but the clients are all required to be as far in the back. You know, if it's a van, there may be a third seat, but usually just in the back seat and on the passenger side. So providing as much distance as we could. In addition to that, we required that they provide some airflow within the vehicle. So have windows down a bit, vents on fresh air setting and not recirculated air to, you know, make the airflow the best possible that we could. And then additionally, we asked that volunteers do not accompany clients into the medical facilities. In a lot of cases, this had been done. It was sort of a comfort measure that was provided for clients, but due to restrictions and so forth, that was stopped. So, and we're not doing a ton of transportation, but our critical needs of our clients are being met, and you know, they're very grateful for it. I mean, especially the ones that we had continued cancer care. They live in places where there really isn't much of an option other than a volunteer ride. So we were very fortunate to have them. A lot of our clients do not have many friends or family in the area, so they don't have someone like that to rely on. Without us, they may not have been able to get to these locations. So that is what we are doing. It is a rural county, but it is on the verge of frontier. So the people are very, very spread apart, and some of these rides can be half an hour, 45 minutes. In some locations, I have some that are even an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we do what we can to get people the critical care they need. And I will take any questions anybody has that I might be able to answer.
Great, thanks, Cindy. I will ask everyone in the audience, if you have any questions for Cindy, make sure to add it to the Q&A pod. And Cindy, you can follow up with them in the Q&A pod. And we'll hand it back to Debbie.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks, Cindy. And we will also gather the questions that are being asked. I see several coming across. Cindy, if you could also put in the chat one more time your email address, if you don't mind, in case someone wants to reach out to you. But you know, transportation programs are vital to our older adults, so it's admirable that you found a way to continue that critical service during this time. And you know, we also, and I'll continue, understand the importance of developing activities for our volunteers who are not technologically savvy, and will continue to seek ways for them to safely serve during this pandemic. And so we appreciate it very much, Cindy. And I really want to shout out a thanks to both you and Crystal for your willingness to share your program's activities with your peers. You know, this is what it's all about. And I'm still every day impressed at the innovation I'm seeing across the country. And so the networks that you all have together, and the sharing that you can do of your activities and how you're finding ways to serve is sometimes much, much more important than anything I can say. But as I mentioned earlier, I do have a few updates that I do want to share with you. Some of these, unfortunately, and I was hoping they would be today, are not final resolutions, but I continue to receive questions. So I just want to tell you where we are in resolving some of these issues. I also want to remind you that there are some issues for which Senior Corps cannot provide an immediate response or resolution, as they have implications beyond just our programs. One of those issues relates to your question about your ability to provide and pay for internet hotspots. I had truly hoped I would have an answer for you today. And while we've received pre-approval to provide you some guidance around this, we are waiting on the final approval before we can make any more announcement about it. I'm fighting hard to provide this flexibility because I know how important it is to you. We've also conducted, as we told you last month, and we finalized some of that, technology-related research, and have developed some information on resources about technology for older adults that we will share with you. That information should come out probably in the next 24 to 48 hours. Again, I want to remind all of you, these are not one size fits all. So you'll still need to determine what's best for you and your programs and or what's available in your state. You know, some of these resources are geographic specific. I've listened to many of you about your challenges with measuring outcomes during the pandemic and your requests for new performance measures. I understand your concerns and challenges, but our performance measures are agency-wide, so that's another issue that has required extensive internal discussion. However, we have identified 2 options we believe can be measured even during this time of COVID-19. Again, these performance measures are being offered as options for convenience. They are not required. Senior Corps is not requiring you to submit amendments to currently approved work plans to change or update these measures. We have shared these options with the 3 National Senior Corps Associations for comment, and we've resolved those comments and will present this during the training for Q3 continuations and renewals. And also, please watch in the first week in October. It will also be included in my new director's notes. The new director's trainings and my director's notes. So I'll provide a link to that. Additionally, we are going to provide you some language for you to consider when submitting your fiscal year 2021 renewals and continuations or amendments for programs with new service activities. Robin, can you hear me? Robin, can you hear me? Can you answer a question for me?
Yeah, yes, you can. I can do my best.
Question, since I'm talking about continuations and renewal, eGrants is open, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I know we had a glitch a day last week when it first opened, but that's been corrected. So if you're having problems, please let the hotline know, but it is open and working. Additionally, I'm very delighted, and I always admit when I'm wrong, and I was certainly wrong this time. I'm truly delighted to share with you, and I'm allowed to at this point, that our RSVP competition received 372 applications for RSVP programs. Way beyond last year, way beyond what I thought we would get. Remember, we opened this on July 1st in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of economic uncertainty, and I am just thrilled to death. I kind of believe that the response is kind of a result of 2 things. First of all, kudos to Jan Newsom, Akiba, and Karen at headquarters because the extensive outreach efforts that they did, I think, really made a difference. And the training that they gave to ORO and our OFL team, excuse me, you all, also made a difference. And you know what? The other thing is communities really need our programs. Our next competition, our FGP and SCP expansion competition, opens October 1st, and I hope and hope and hope that we receive the same level of response for those programs. I'm excited about that now, although I know in this pandemic it's a little difficult. Our agency is moving forward with finalizing our rebranding initiative, and I want to note again that I've set aside funds so you will be provided rebranded materials for you to order free of charge from our publication warehouse. I'm waiting on those final numbers to come in, the final approvals to come in, so we can get that out to you. I am also wanting to tell all of you, I'm just compelled to reiterate how important it is for all of you to actually read the Gov delivery messages that we're sending you. Excuse me, y'all. These messages contain valuable up-to-date information from us that include program guidance, eGrants information, deadlines, announcements, processes, and resolutions to your questions, and the programmatic information that you need to hear and that you need to know. I understand there's a lot of information coming your way, but we're in the midst of unconventional times, and this is really the only way I have to get all this information out to you. My staff spends a lot of time and energy trying to ensure that you're kept up to date on everything you need to know. So it's extremely important that you open and read our messages because we cannot be held accountable for a deadline or other information you miss because you failed to read the Gov delivery messages, and I just can't stress that enough. And one other thing I'd like to say, I want to say that none of us could have ever imagined that we would be nearing the end of another fiscal year and still be in the midst of this pandemic. But you know what? Here we are. So the best we can do is to keep trying moving forward. In Senior Corps, we are wrapping up FY20, while at the same time making decisions for FY21. I'm reviewing plans for carry forward and also for augmenting all grantees, hopefully sometime during the first quarter of the year. I know you have expenses and you need expenses for technology and PPE. And while it is based on appropriations, I do plan and hope to, if all of that comes together. I apologize, guys. I don't know what I got in my throat. There's a gnat in my office. It's hot in here. To provide an augmentation in the first quarter. You know, I'm optimistic about our future because we are strong, we are resilient, and we will remain that way together. I know there's a lot of questions about what we're going to do with temporary allowance. I can only say this to you today. It is my desire to extend the temporary allowance, but remember, that decision is not mine and mine alone, so please stay tuned on that. I want to thank all of you for being on the call today, and more importantly, just for your commitment to Senior Corps. And I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Debbie. A couple of questions I wanted to touch on before we sign off for this afternoon. I saw a question about if FGP was competitive now. So the competition that Debbie referred to is the expansion competition. We used to call it replacement. This year we're calling it expansion because we're expanding, and that opens up on October 1st. Q3 continuations and renewals, that's our same old process, a little bit different, and I recommend that you join our calls that start next week to learn more about the process. Saw a couple of questions about Gov delivery messages. If you could send an email to scinnovation@cns.gov with the email that you would like added to Gov delivery in case you're not getting them, I'll be able to double check and make sure that they are in there. And then the third thing, because we got a couple of these questions, why are the Q3 continuation and renewals due in November instead of January? We have moved the process back, so it's a little earlier this year. So because we're starting earlier with the continuation and renewal process, the applications are due earlier as well. If you have any more questions, make sure you add them in the Q&A pod. We do try to answer them throughout the week. We are recording this. We will post the recording by the end of the week on the All Grantee Call course on Litmus. And I think I touched on most of the main themes of questions that we saw. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please stay safe and healthy, and we will talk to you in October.